Good evening, everybody. Today is September the 5th, 2021. The time is approximately 6:40 p.m. We're having, one of our colleagues was having some technical difficulty. We waited to see if she was able to get online. She's not, but as soon as she's able, she'll join the rest of us. But we'll go ahead and get started. As you all know, this meeting was called as a work session, a meeting so that the Board of Education could hear the superintendent's any movement or progress that has been made in an effort to accommodate our students who, it appears that the students and their families overwhelmingly want to be back in the classroom and not learn via remote technology. So we're going to hear from the superintendent, and I, as I understand it, there may be some others commenting and offering information and insights into the current challenges that we have. So, and then after those presentations are made, I understand that the board members will be allowed to ask questions. I know I've had a number of questions that have been sort of on bat for a while. And then we'll talk about next steps. So, Superintendent Myers-Small, the gavel, as they say, is yours.
Thank you, President White. Good evening to all of the commissioners. Good evening to my staff. And good evening, certainly, to Ms. Simmons. Thank you for being here tonight as well. Also, thank you to Dr. Jallo. So this evening, we asked for this meeting to provide an update to the Board of Education of progress that we've made relative to solving issues that were outlined on Friday. I apologize to the board. This is going to be duplicative, but I want to make sure that our public understand the work that has happened from when we ended the board emergency board meeting on Friday to what has happened till this morning. So after the Board of Education meeting on Friday, President White and I made a series of phone calls and had interactions with the governor's office, with local elected officials, as well as the Conference of Big Five Schools. Our cabinet was here on site. They were working to just try and work from the premise that remote learning was off the table. Had conversations with our state monitor and the New York State Department of Education to work through some transportation concerns and questions that I had. At 6 p.m., I met with the Parent Leadership Advisory Committee and other parents to just hear concerns, to get feedback, and to uplift that. Commissioner Malloy was on that meeting with me. And then the cabinet, while I was in those meetings, the cabinet was working. So I was bouncing from meeting back to cabinet. And later that evening, late in the evening, we had a meeting with RTS to outline what our transportation needs were. Right before 9, we sent a communication out to staff, letting them know that we had just been working on those things that I outlined. After the meeting with RTS, we met, meaning our CFO, Carlene, Mike Schmidt, our Chief Operating Officer, myself, and Deputy Superintendent Morris. We met to kind of debrief and just talk about next steps and to discuss the outcome of the meeting. Later that evening, I just debriefed to talk about communications with my communications chief, and then I spoke with my other deputy superintendent. First thing, and addressed the media at a live press conference at the transportation center, and that's where we were working all day. When we left that meeting on Saturday, extremely hopeful. We had several conversations with RTS, and at that point, commissioners, we had all but 4 schools covered for transportation. And those last 4 schools, we were working with RTS to provide that additional coverage as we were working to know what would happen. This morning, our team again came together to just tidy up any loose ends that we needed and make sure that we were prepared for this meeting tonight. We met with principals and we met with union leadership, and I met with the Student Leadership Congress. I had to leave that meeting early because I received word that some of our transportation providers had time crunch, and they have really been able to work miracles in a very short amount of time. But what I want our commissioners and our public who are watching, our families, that this situation really is continually evolving. And so, whereas this morning I could say, here are the 52 schools, I can't say that now with the change in the resignations or retirements, and then having those no-shows. There are phone calls that are happening right now to see if something was a fluke or did something happen. But we now have to go back and reevaluate. So I would love to be able to say, okay, even with that adjustment, here are the schools. I don't have that because it's a little more intricate than that. So what I've done is I've asked our Director of Transportation, Wayne Kittleberger, to come on. He's going to introduce the 4 transportation providers who we work with to give just kind of a status update so you have an understanding, and then we'll have you open it up to ask questions, and then we'll talk about some next steps. So that's where we are right now. Before I transition over to Wayne, do you have any questions for me about what I outlined with the process?
I'm looking at the list of participants, seeing if anybody has raised their hand. I don't see any, and that's probably a good thing. So I think you laid it out. So why don't you go ahead and proceed with your presentation as described.
Okay, so with that, Mr. Kittleberger, I'm going to turn it over to you to just give just a brief introduction and then introduce our transportation providers who are here with us this afternoon, evening.
Good evening. My name is Wayne Kittleberger, the Director of Transportation, along with Stephanie Moreau. Hold on.
You're echoing, Wayne.
Yes, we're switching. That better? Okay. Right now, I'd just like to introduce a couple of our contractors that are here. We have Barb from First Student, and we will have Brett from MST. And they are both on, and we'd just like them to explain where they're at as far as their shortage of drivers and concerns that we are facing. So Barb, you're on.
Good evening, everyone. I also have my Senior Vice President of First Student, Brian Fitzgerald.
I'm sorry.
We've been meeting with Stephanie and Wayne from the city.
If
Hold
you're
on.
watching yourself on YouTube,
No, I unmuted.
or you have it up on
Can you hear me?
video, that's for that.
Commissioner LeBron, please. I think you're having some communication problems. Commissioner Braun and others are having a difficult time hearing you because there's some feedback. You may be watching yourself on YouTube. Please, anybody who is going to be a speaker, make sure that you have any other audio or digital devices off so that you don't.
Could you hear me now?
That's better, Barb.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Like I said, we've been meeting, my team here at First Student has been meeting since 11 o'clock this morning to go over routes that the city has transferred some of the routes over to Ontario. So with that in mind, we had some open slots at our end to cover all of the uncovered routes that we had. We got it down to practically probably 14 runs as of this morning. And then, like Dr. Leslie Small says, that Friday we had lost probably close to 20 drivers that came in and not only did not do their dry runs, which they were scheduled to do it Thursday and Friday, they never showed up. We've reached them by phone. Some have not answered their phones. So we're going to be sending out letters to them, certified letters, to see if they're still interested in employment with us. But we are down to 14 runs as of tonight that we cannot cover.
Barbara, 14 out of how many? If you could just clarify that.
Well, originally where we started, it was 50 as of Thursday.
But what is the grand total of all First Student and Monroe Transportation run, so that we have a sense of proportion?
We had 431 routes. That was the meeting we had with Mike and his team on Thursday, wasn't it, or Friday? We had 431 first student routes.
I just want to say to my colleagues, I'm totally fine with people just sort of dialoguing without raising your digital hand. But if it gets to be there are too many questions, we don't want to be inconsiderate of our speakers. So anybody else want to follow up on Commissioner Powell's questions or ask their own questions of this speaker?
I did
go
need, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, President White. I did need clarification. So now we're saying that of 431 routes, we're down 14 as of right now, correct?
Correct.
I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
First student only. Yes, I only represent first student. Yes.
Yes, understood.
How many students are impacted by the loss of 14 routes?
That I don't know.
Can I ask if someone in our own internal transportation would be able to answer that question? Because that was going to be my question as well.
Mike, or can anybody answer that question?
Wayne, do you have that right in front of you? Commissioner and LeBron and Commissioner Clark, we'll pull that up. I think because some of these routes that we're going to discuss tonight involve students with disabilities as well as regular education students. So some could be as small as 2 or 3 students going to an agency, or as large as a traditional full service bus. So let me, Wayne and Stephanie will pull that and have that in a moment. The student impact for all the different routes that we will be referencing this evening.
And Mike, as a follow-up to my colleague's question,
yes, sir.
and as a follow-up to your statement, depending on the number of students that is indicated by first student, how many of those students are special needs students? Because just because you have 14 runs,
sure,
it could be a significant number of students to fill up all those seats, or because they're special needs students, it could be a smaller number. So to have an understanding of how many of those seats involve special needs students would be helpful.
Right. So in a normal environment, first student would be transporting our students K to 8, K to 8, our regular education students. Monroe would be transporting our students with disabilities. And we now have a new vendor, Ontario, which was scheduled to transport our high school students. Because of the driver shortage and the things that we've been discussing, we've had to basically redeploy all numerous drivers from those 3 companies to handle. For our first priority is our students with disabilities, and then our second priority is certainly our students, our regular education students that are attending school. So that's why it's not quite as clean as the first 2, because they're actually right at this point covering each other's runs, so to speak, to make sure that we have as many possible covered for the first day. So in a normal year, President White would be very clean, right? First student has this, and it's a traditional. That's why it's a bit of a struggle, because we're kind of trying to capture where we are, and we pulled them away from meeting tonight to talk with you. We're still meeting, trying to combine routes and do what we can. I think the other thing to share is, before I turn it back to Barb and Wayne, is that one of the moves, as Leslie articulated, in regards to the genius that Wayne and Stephanie have shown, is the fact of being able to link as many routes as possible together so that we can maximize the use of a driver. In a traditional 3-tier school setting, it's very simple. They do school first tier, second tier, and third tier, and they would do 6 runs a day. But with the students with disabilities, because of where they're going all over Monroe County, or even further, linking those routes is a real challenge. So that's the work that they're doing right now, which is why they're all together this evening, to continue to kind of match that up. So that gives you a little bit of context of the type of mechanisms that are going on behind the scenes, and also a little bit of context as to some of your frustration, because it is a moving target. You cover one run, you feel like you've got things under control there, and then you end up with, as Barbara alluded to, another vacancy or a resignation and so forth, and that equates to, it could be 44 students or 35, 30 students on a bus, or it could be 3 or 4 special education students that are attending an out of district agency. So that's why it's that's why it's frustrating, and that's why it's a moving target. because you feel like you have your handle on it. And then, as Barbara articulated, you wake up, this morning and you end up with several more vacancies. We also are very concerned because it is only Sunday, and our full driver, our full contingent of drivers have not actually, shown up in the sense for their first day of work, first day of school. And what the story we're receiving from school districts across the country is that's where we're also seeing a significant number of driver no-shows. And so that's the other thing. We're trying to build as many contingency plans as possible. When we say we have 14 uncovered runs, that means we don't have any backups. So during a pandemic, to not have any substitute drivers is also perilous as well. So I hope I've given kind of Wayne and Steph enough time to kind of provide a bit of context in terms of where we are to the number of routes, the number of students compared to the routes we're referring to this evening.
So,
Are there any other questions? I'm sorry, go ahead,
Mr. President.
Sure.
So what are the totals that we're talking about? We're talking about more than 14. 14 is just for Ontario, correct? Ontario's transportation?
Per student.
Per student only is 14.
Per student is one that the 14?
Yes.
So what are the numbers for the other transportation companies? Have we lost any from the other transportation companies?
Yes, we did. But we have Brett on from Monroe School Transportation that probably could explain even better about their situation.
Before we do that, Wayne, are there any of my colleagues? I saw that Shelley, the independent monitor, had a question in the chat room. Are there any other questions for first student? Shelley, your question, which was in the chat room, I didn't have a chance to read it. Can you, do you want to vocalize it? Does it relate specifically to?
I know it's the same number. I understand the complexity of the situation, but if someone can guarantee, promise, ensure that we will have numbers for first students impacted by being down 14 routes, whether it's one child on that route or 400 kids on that route, if we could just have a number, because we need to quantify it. There are many people watching this meeting who are looking for numbers, partially to understand how we're doing and also to help us. But they need data.
Hold on 1 second before you answer that, because this is sort of an add-on to that. In addition to having the numbers, I'm just going to speak honestly, and I know you guys have been working very hard, but to not have the numbers is problematic. But also, it suggests to me that you can't be possibly close to the solution, because not only do you not have to have the numbers, but you should know at some point, and you might know it later tonight because you're tied up in this meeting tonight, you should know where these students are, what their needs are. Can we combine students? And I'm sure you've done a lot of that examination, but we haven't heard it. And so when we ask you, what are the numbers? We're hoping that you know what the numbers are, because Dr. Jallo is right. That's what people are wondering. And then when we don't hear that, there's a concern. And then more importantly, it makes me think strategically, how do they plan to address this problem if they don't know the numbers? And as I think this one step further, where these students are and what their needs are. Have you gotten to the point where you've got these 14 runs that have to be addressed? Do you know the number of students? And then do you know where they are such that you could combine them with other runs? That's my concern. When I hear you don't know how many, and presumably, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, you don't even know where these students are and how you could combine them. I'm telling you, that's what's going to cause concern for people listening to this. And don't take offense to it. These are the questions that people are asking because they haven't heard the answers, and they are entitled to hear them. So do you know, how quickly can you get us the numbers? And then I'm asking, where are these students, and have you thought about how you could combine them? That's to you first, student. Or Wayne.
White, for first student, it's about 283 students that are being affected from first student.
Wayne, do we know where they're located? Is there any way to sort of put these students together on a run?
They're all over the city, and they're at different locations, Van White, that it's hard to condense them onto a run because some are in the city and then some could be with agencies. So trying to condense them far as the bell times is our major concern.
So, and again, this will be the last question I ask, because this is one of my questions. So if you knew where they were, for example, and let's say 83 of those students, actually their secondary school was close by them, right? Let's say it was within a mile and a half or within walking distance or in carpooling distance. That would be only 200 students left. So have you done that kind of strategizing or calculating? How many of those 283 students are actually closer to their schools than the others? Have you done that assessment? I don't need the answer, but have you done that assessment?
The 283 students for first student,
Yep.
all of them are over a mile and a half from the school. None of them are close around the school.
Have you done an assessment with respect to how some might be closer to the schools than others? Because it may come down to that. We may have to prioritize, or you all may have to prioritize and say, these are the kids will get to school because they're so X, Y, and Z distance away from their school. These other students and their families may have to galvanize and mobilize and get to their schools because they're 1.7 miles away from their school. But I'm set there. I just want you to know my thinking, and I think other people's thinking. Yes, I see somebody raising their hand. Ma'am.
Can I respond to that question?
Who are you? Could you please identify yourself?
My name is Stephanie Morell. I'm also a director with Mr. Kittleberger.
Okay.
And we are currently, and those are the numbers we just got to prior to the call.
Okay.
So we have that handful of routes in front of us. And so the next step is, what other options do we have with this particular group? So unfortunately, it's that's where we're at with it, but that's the particular group that we just got to before the call this evening.
Fair enough, fair enough. Mr. Clark, I saw that you asked a question in the chat room. Do you want to vocalize that?
Are you muted or disconnected?
Mr. Clark? Commissioner Clark?
Commissioner Clark, you're muted.
My question is, of those 14 routes, can we reshift that so that we have a minimal impact on the number of students? Make sure we're picking up the larger groups, and that way fewer students would be impacted by the 14 routes.
I could certainly take
yes,
that one.
absolutely. That's our intent.
Absolutely. That's that.
Are there any other questions for first student? These are
President White, I got my hand up, and Commissioner Malloy has her hand up as well. I don't know if you can't see, but
Commissioner LeBron, I had indicated that, and I said it a few minutes ago, that if people wanted to just ask questions, they could without using the digital hand raising. So go ahead, feel free. If it gets too crowded and we overwhelm our guest speakers, we'll go by the digital hands. But go ahead, ask your question.
So actually, this question is just for more in terms of clarification of what's happening in this meeting, because one, I anticipated that we were going to have some answers, and all I'm hearing is that we're going in circles talking about bus routes and numbers that people should have definitely had before they walked into this meeting. For us to be scrambling to understand what 14 routes mean, it doesn't mean anything to me. Doesn't mean anything to anybody listening, any parents waiting to hear if their child's going to be going back to school Wednesday or not. So I just want to take a step back and ask, we have first student here. If we have other transportation companies, is the expectation that we're going to hear about all of the deficits and routes that each different transportation organization has? I would expect that we're going to hear numbers from all of the organizations and not just hound in on first student. Internally as well, I need to understand how many RCSD buses and routes are being impacted as well. In addition to that, after these presentations, is it your intention, Superintendent, to let us know as parents, because some of us on this board, we're board members, but we're also parents in this district and are just as anxious as every other parent in this community about what's going to happen Wednesday. So is it your intention to share that with us after these numbers have been shared?
Commissioner LeBron, I can give you what my intentions are, but the issue is this information, as Stephanie shared, came. So we are, right when we get done with this, we will be working with transportation to figure out how to readjust our numbers. So I'm going to be asking, I need another day to fix that, because things are constantly evolving. Tomorrow morning, we could get word that we have another 5 or 7 or 17. So that's the issue that I know is frustrating to you. It's frustrating to me. I can say, yes, here's what we're going to do, and that can change again.
A superintendent, with all due respect, I don't understand where this extra time is gonna come from. Yes, tomorrow's a holiday, it's Monday. We will all have to come back to the board meeting. I know that all of the commissioners will make themselves available. It's not a matter of whether we're gonna be available, but we're gonna be available to then still not have answers. And again, we have a very anxious student body. I went to the student forum, parents, caregivers, everyone's anxiously awaiting some answer. If we don't have an answer today and tomorrow there's an additional loss of drivers who are not present and routes impacted, how are we going to have an answer tomorrow? If we don't have one today with the routes and the numbers impacted. I just would like us to make a determination, or for you to make a determination, so we know what to expect on Wednesday.
Commissioner LeBron, let me just add, the superintendent indicated that her approach was going to be to have the guest speakers from the different bus companies explain their dilemma. I do think some board members have found some value in it because a number of board members have asked questions. We're not the day-to-day operational people. I would agree with anybody, yourself included, says this isn't our responsibility to figure out the bus runs. But given the dilemma, and given the fact that there are board members who have questions, myself included, she's presented some speakers, and I would like to continue on with that, understanding the frustration. Superintendent Myers-Small will tell you, I expressed the same concern. I said, what are the answers? People are going to expect the solution today. But she's telling us quite honestly, with some level of frustration of her own, that the answers aren't available today. She decided that it was in the best interest to let the contractors provide a description of their dilemma. I think it's appropriate for any board member to have a question, to put those questions. Mr. Kittleberger has been available, Mike has been available. So unless there are other further questions of first student, and understanding that,
President,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Amy. I'm sorry, Commissioner Malloy, go ahead.
Thank you. Just to kind of reiterate what I can understand where everyone's coming from on this. I understand the frustration and that we don't have entirely accurate numbers at this point, it sounds like. But to Commissioner LeBron's point, what I was expecting really to hear when we came here is, as of the time that this meeting started, how many total runs do we have as a district for all our bus companies, right? How many total runs do we have? And then of those total runs, how many of those are covered? How many are we still short as of when this meeting started? Because it's all subject to change. I know things could still change, but how many do we have covered as of, right now? And then it would be more helpful, because I think we're getting ahead of ourselves, then break it down company by company, because when I hear like 14 and all this, it is very confusing and there's nothing up in front of us. It's just faces right now. I'm a visual person, and I think a lot of our members of the public watching would want to see things up on a screen, if at all possible. So right now, how many do we see?
And Commissioner Clark, I think you asked. So we have, I know that Barb shared the 14 runs for the first student and the 283 students. Monroe School Transportation we have currently 32 uncovered routes that affect 193 students. So we're looking at just a shade over 400 students that are affected with those uncovered routes as of right now. I will let Brett from Monroe School Transportation speak a little bit more to the story in regards to that, and then have them give the total number of routes that each one of them are doing. And then the only thing in fairness to them, because of the shifting of the routes to try to make sure we have everything covered, the total for each one of the vendors is more than they would have been when we're scheduled to provide, because they're taking on the other company's routes. In addition, Ontario School Transportation right now does not have any uncovered routes, and Rochester, the Rochester RGRTA for the 6 schools are scheduled to provide transportation for at this moment does not have any uncovered routes. All right, and I'm sorry for the delay in some of that part of it, but I want to make sure people have to ask their questions, and I thought I would just give one summative answer in regards to those particular numbers.
So Mike, to Commissioner Malloy's point, you said 193 students affected by Monroe.
Yep.
And first student was it 283?
14 for 283, and Monroe is 32 for 193.
No. I was talking about total students affected.
Oh,
193 for Monroe.
That's right.
And was it 283 for first student?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And those two together are the total number of students that do not have rides to school, or is there more?
No, there are. Well, as Dr. Myers-Small pointed out earlier, we have the 4 high schools that we had talked, as she had mentioned earlier, that don't have coverage either. So, or the high schools, excuse me, they don't have coverage either. So those equate to a significant number of additional routes, but they're schools in full. These runs we're talking about here affect, a variety of schools or agencies that we're talking about specifically tonight when we talk about first student. The schools that Dr. Myers-Small mentioned earlier, those entire schools are not yet covered, which is why the conversation with the Rochester Transit Service was necessary and as previously discussed.
And that number is 3,200 students.
Thank you, Dr. Myers-Small. So just at the risk of being redundant, 193 students are subject to concern at Monroe with respect to Monroe transportation, 283 for first student, and for the 4 high schools, which would presumably include a solution that involve RGRTA, would be 3,200 students. Is that right? Is that the total number of students that are vulnerable to not being able to be in their seats? Is that right?
Yes, sir, at this time.
That's the 3,200. Is that what the 3,200 was referring to? Is that we have 3,200 students who do not have transportation before the start of school? How many of our students do have transportation and are ready to start on Wednesday? Like how many?
So we have, again, the 3,200 are at for grades 1 school, that's a 7-8 school, and then the others are 9 through 12, and then they just gave you, my colleagues presented the information for the runs that we just lost there. So
I'm going to jump in and ask the question because when we had our individual meetings, I specifically asked for numbers. I was told 70 bus drivers at that time. Granted, I understand that the bus driving situation is a fluctuating number, but I was told it was 40 routes for Monroe, 38 routes impacted at that time for first student, for a total of 2,000 students impacted. So for that number to jump from 2,000, and you guys have been working around the clock to now jump to 3,200 students with RTS, 283 with student first, and 193. I need to now understand where these numbers are coming from. I wrote down notes from our meeting. So Ricardo Adams was in that meeting with me, and so was our state monitor. These are the numbers I was provided when we met in groups in 2s and 3s. These numbers are significantly smaller than the numbers that are being presented today. So I just want some clarification as to where these numbers came from.
Stephanie, I believe, has her hand up to respond, Commissioner LeBron.
Part of that is due to the shift of work. So by shifting charter schools to Ontario and then shifting some special needs routes to student, again, creates such an overlap of bus counts and student counts. So that's where we're finding the different numbers as far as students being affected.
Do you understand that? Hold
on, Commissioner LeBron, finish up, and then I hear Commissioner Adams.
Yeah, I just want to put it on record that I was provided a much smaller number a few days ago to then say we're working around the clock and we've gotten some resolutions and we thought we had a grip on it, and then you're presenting much larger numbers today. That gives me a great number of concerns around where the data is coming from and whether it's accurate or not.
Commissioner Adams? Commissioner Adams?
Yeah, so we have the details of exactly how many students. So that means we know, we can identify these students. Why can't we extend a survey and ask those students, can they make it to school on their own? And I'm sure when you're talking about grown kids, man, because to me, they almost grown when they 14 and 15. It's a lot of them probably can make it to school, and that probably would reduce some of the need. I don't think you could resolve the whole issue with that, but that's just another way. I'm identifying who, send a survey to them and ask them, can they make it to the school for a couple of weeks on their own? I believe they probably can. There's probably a lot of them can.
Commissioner
That's
Adams.
all I have.
Commissioner Adams, we started that when we when we knew that we needed to cover the 4 secondary schools. We met with principals this afternoon to talk that through, to say, your school right now, we're working to negotiate transportation services with RTS, because that process is still going on. We could offer students can come to school either if they can walk, or if they can get a ride, or if they can be driven by a family member or someone else. And then the other scholars who can't, and we could do like, simultaneous instruction or something like that. So the students who could come could. And that makes that, even though I know, and I heard very heartfelt and passionately our secondary students saying they can't do, we could fix that and quickly get them back into awful in-person with trying to quickly resolve with RTS. Where the conundrum comes in is these additional students, hundreds of students, some of them are students that have IEPs. And so we're trying to now, and again, I get the frustration, but now we're trying to reconfigure to try and make sure that the students with disabilities with IEPs are covered. But we could certainly, the secondary students, that 3,200, we can reach out to them, and we had a plan in place to do that when we thought everything was good for a start on Wednesday or Thursday. That's where we were last night and this morning. So again, we could have moved forward with that, and that was part of, once I had an understanding, and I thought we might even be able to have some more definitive answers as we're working things through with RTS. Again, we're still in the midst of negotiations, but that was my thought, that we could come to you that way and say, here's where it is. The conundrum that we have to rework is the fact that we now have these runs with First Student and Monroe. We've got to figure out how to fix that. That's why, I mean, that's really the main issue. I had a plan again to talk about secondary, which I thought would be very clean, not perfect, but clean, where students could either have in-person instruction or receive it simultaneously. And we had pretty much worked that out.
Dr. Myers-Small,
reworking superintendents, all of those things to get that settled. But it now, again, so if I said, that's what we're going to do that for the secondaries, those 4 secondary schools. And then if those hundreds of students can find their way, but then tomorrow or the next day, we can get additional information that we've had more drivers resign. So if you want me to give you piecemeal plans that way, I certainly can do that, but it is more than likely going to change. And that's what we were trying to do, is build contingencies in for when we had the resignations or the no-shows, but we hadn't quite gotten to that point. We thought we were there and didn't expect for it to happen so quickly.
Vice President Elliott?
Yeah, of those 3,200 students, at least that's where we are now, of those students, how many of those students prefer to learn online? Do we have an idea of that number of students that prefer to learn online? Because I do know that I have received emails from parents preferring to learn online.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what that number is, but that may be an opportunity to look at that and then to move those students into an online environment. But this is a moving target. I know people don't want to hear this, but we may have to have our high school students to do online learning. We may not want to hear that, but that's going to be a choice that I think we have to put back on the table, unfortunately. But that's all. Thank you.
Commissioner Malloy, before you, I do want to make a point that referenced something you said earlier. I don't want to lose questions that were asked and not answered. So at the risk of being redundant, it's important to write down these numbers. 193 at Monroe, students we're talking about, 283 at First Student, 3,200 students at high schools for high schools. I have questions about that. But Commissioner Malloy, I believe, asked a separate question. So now that we have the number of students that are vulnerable and may not have rides to schools, she also asked how many students have we actually, can we ensure that they will have transportation? Can you give us that number? Because I think that's really, we got to understand the full universe here. Students who are vulnerable and don't have rides. We also need to understand how many students actually do have rides. Can you give us a number without breaking it down into schools? How many students can you ensure in this universe will actually have rides?
I think President White, that's not a number that we have to be, we have to pull that number out. We can certainly provide that tomorrow to the board. That's not a number that we're prepared to provide this evening based upon where they are and what they're working on. We'd have to go back and tally up all the different schools that have transportation, charters, private parochial, urban, suburban, in our own public schools in order to get that. But as we've said and I've articulated, we've transferred about 31,000 students to about 110 different locations. So just some rough math, which I'm really cautious not to do in this type of a setting. You know, we have the far majority of the students in the city of Rochester have transportation, scheduled and ready to be provided. But I think speculation or not solid numbers in this form is not the best way to handle that. So I think we will we'll be able to get you that total number tomorrow morning.
And Mike, when you
I would respectfully ask though, Mike, if
Yes.
we know who's covered, that should be
Yep.
somebody, and again, I don't know
Yes.
the simplicity
Yep.
or difficulty. If somebody can just go off and then figure out and just go through, we should be able to provide that number to the board.
No disagreement. I guess it kind of depends on the timeline of it, but I can certainly have, we can go and tally that up. It should not take us long to do that, but
I would appreciate that.
That's just not how we were, where we were trying to, we wanted to make sure tonight we gave you the updated gaps in terms of where we are on those sites.
Mr. Schmidt, if you
Yes,
could
sir.
make sure when you identify that Malloy number, those number of students who do have rides, if you could break it down in terms of elementary school students and high school students. It would be nice to know what schools are
work on that right
covered
now.
as well, to give us that kind of detail. But again, we need to understand the entire universe. And let me just say, before I get to Commissioner Malloy, and I want the community to hear this, this is operational stuff. And where you hear frustration from the members of the Board of Education is we are frequently told not to engage in operational issues. That's the job of the superintendent. But given the exigency, this emergency nature of the circumstance, we're all sort of compelled into the same room of trying to figure this out, because we heard the community yesterday and today. They overwhelmingly, they want to be in the classroom. Commissioner Malloy?
Thank you. Yeah, so the numbers obviously are really important and we need to have those, but also we know that this is all because of a nationwide driver shortage. Are we still short RCSD drivers, those who are Bente employees? And what type of incentives have we been offering to get more drivers in? Can anyone answer that for me? Thank you.
So we haven't, other than our negotiated contract, and Dr. Miller, I'd ask, we do not have any incentives similar to the other transportation providers have. We don't have any incentives at this point. We have been working on that, but that we need to remember, we have to go through a process for use of CURSA funds, right? For that. That is something that we have on the table, but it has to go through the approval process, and it has not been approved as of yet.
Commissioner LeBron, I saw that you were raising your virtual hand.
Yep. So I'm going to also say that this is a national crisis, but we knew that back in May, in April, in June, July, August. I just want to put that on record because I get really frustrated when we're trying to kick the can to this national crisis. It's our crisis because we also allowed it to snowball to this point. We have to all take ownership, myself included, that this is where we're at as a district. Out of these 193 students from Monroe and the 283 students from First Student, I would like to understand from the K-12, because I understand that special education is also in there as well. And so there may be students who are special ed who are on any of these two providers. How many are from each transportation company, how many are K through 12 from all the grades and also special education? So if that data can be broken down that way. And then I want to just say this, I don't want to come tomorrow and have these types of conversations, because if we were going to have these type of conversations, these are the types of conversations we could have had in groups of 2 or 3 before we got to this meeting right here at this time. So I do not want to come back on tomorrow to be spinning in circles around data and numbers that we don't have. I just want to understand when our kids are going to start school, when I can expect my daughter to start school, when the rest of the commissioners and the community and our parents can expect their kids to start school, whether they have transportation or not. That's it.
I certainly appreciate Commissioner LeBron's concern. I would imagine a good majority of citizens in Rochester, particularly the parents, just want to know if their kids is going to be in school on Wednesday or Thursday or whenever it is. That's really what they're interested in. But since we're in this place, since we're in this crisis, I would like to see a superintendent, a sort of a heat map, and we don't even have to make it part of a presentation, because I'm with people who say I want the solution, but I'm willing to dialogue because we're here in this place together in this crisis. I, for example, would like to see a heat map or a dashboard that would tell us where the gaps are, where the needs are, so that again, I want to emphasize, this isn't really board work. This is something that the administration should do, but we are here and we have to be here together. And so a heat map or a dashboard with these numbers that my fellow commissioners have asked for would be extremely helpful, if not for us, certainly for you all, because you got to figure out where the opportunities are to mobilize citizens, where the opportunities are to mobilize bus services. But let's not miss an opportunity to hear from Monroe. I don't see anybody else raising their hands. Mr. Kittleberger was, oh, Mr. Clark. Commissioner Clark, do you have a question before we hear from Monroe?
Yes. Given the conversation and us knowing that these numbers that we're getting are very fluid, they could change tomorrow, they could change day after tomorrow. So it's a moving target. So my question is, what are we doing as far as education, as far as preparation, to make sure that we retain the drivers that we currently have? Because they need to understand that they're operating in a safe environment. And if we could reach out to some of the drivers that have misconceptions and maybe provide this level of education, hopefully we can bring some of them back into the fold also.
I don't know if Mr. Kittleberger or Mr. Schmidt or the superintendent want to respond to that. It's a good question.
Wayne is trying to come up. Wayne, you're muted.
Hold on. Okay. We've been trying everything. We've been giving sign-on bonuses. We've been reaching out to retired drivers, people that just left that we could not get in touch with. We've been doing everything in our power, even raising the bar far as what the entry level is to come in and drive. We've been doing everything under the sun. We've been getting more leaving than we've been getting coming. It's really been a challenge. But at this time, I know you guys want numbers. It's very important. But at this time, we are trying to pair work together. We just don't do city school district. I mean, we do the whole Rochester. And it's really been an impact on all of us because of the shortage of drivers. We have the vehicles, we have the buses, we just don't have the bodies to drive all the buses. And one other thing that is challenging to us, because we have a lot of our SPED students that have restrictions that limit us to how many students can ride a bus. And if we put more students than what's supposed to be on that bus, then we're out of compliance. So we are trying to be very mindful and trying to do our best to try to attach a lot of these runs together and move some runs over. But at the end of the day, they do not have enough bodies.
Understood that. And my question is, evidently, it's not a money issue. It's an education issue. And if we're going to retain the drivers we have, they need to understand that they're working in a safe environment and that we're providing the PPE equipment and everything they need, and how they can, safely operate their buses. Otherwise, we're going to have even more exodus as our drivers fear coming into contact with too many students.
Where are we with recruitment?
Go ahead, Mr. Kittleberger. Did you want to respond to that?
Yes. That is correct what you're saying. Someone asked a question about how many drivers did we lose internal. We normally have 70 runs internal. We are down to 47, which we lost 23 runs. Once this pandemic hit, we had people just retiring. We lost one of our drivers due to COVID that was driving. And after that, it just started going downhill, not just for CSD, First Student, Monroe, and I don't know about RTS too much, but that's the impact that we've been getting.
Vice President Elliott, you had a
I
comment?
basically was going, how does the COVID regulations for the bus also impact? Does that take the numbers, up where we need more buses given the COVID regulations on the bus? Am I asking that correctly? In other words,
yes. I mean, certainly, in order for as much social distancing as possible on the buses, the nature of having less students on a bus means you would inherently need more drivers. So we've done, we've really done everything responsible in terms of that to try to minimize and make sure we meet as much social distancing as possible. All our students will wear masks as well as our driver, but you're right, Vice President Elliott, that it also certainly is a condition that is making this situation far more difficult.
So what's the status now on our recruitment efforts?
I think because we have both Monroe and First Student on here, I'm going to shift that maybe to Monroe to talk about. I think Brett's on here to talk a little about what they're doing over at Monroe in terms of driver recruitment, and then maybe also a little bit more of a status update from their perspective, and hence the uncovered routes and so forth, with some of the additional challenges they may be dealing with, and then we'll transition to First Student for their recruitment strategies and so.
Great. Thank you. I'm Brett Wester. I'm the region manager for Monroe. I just wanted to cover a few things, and I'll try to catch up on our numbers with everybody else's. About a month, 5 weeks ago, we were at 110 drivers for typically about 145 routes. Over the last 5 weeks, as we move forward, one step forward, we would take 2 steps back. Right now, we're at 99 drivers for typically around 145 routes. I know Stephanie was able and Wayne were able to move some of those routes around a little bit to drop us down to the 36 routes that we're short right now. A lot of the losses that we've seen are from people that are worried about the Delta variant. We've had people that have taken personal leave and people that have left, which is almost 20 of those drivers that we're short. We've had 5 right now that are active in our system, but still not responding. And we've got 22 drivers that have resigned over the last couple weeks. So as we increase drivers, they basically went right out the back door. We have a pretty massive recruiting campaign that's going on. We use multiple websites. We have banners, we have flyers. We're doing all types of things to get the word out. I will tell you that in the last week, now that people are knowing that unemployment is ending, we are starting to get some more applications in. In fact, we have received 4 licensed drivers that would like to move into the school bus industry just in the last week. So I know that's not a lot, but it is when you have a licensed driver that can be turned around in a couple weeks. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I know we had talked a little bit last week about trying to get some additional coverage, but apparently one of the vendors cannot cover the special needs as hoped. So that's why we're still at 36 right now with 190 some students.
Right. Can you also talk about the bus attendants?
Yeah, the bus attendants right now, we have enough bus attendants at our location.
One of the challenges we faced when we were trying to shift work around is that Ontario, which was scheduled to transport our secondary education students, did not have bus attendants because they're not required for the service they have. So as we're trying to shift work around, the bus attendant problem also, the bus attendants has also presented a challenge. Brian and Barb, from the First Student perspective, can you kind of give a bit of an overview as to your recruitment and where you are?
Yes, we have a very aggressive recruiting system. We have a full-time recruiter and we have our own training center here in Rochester. What we did July 1st, we had the starting wage up $3, so it's $20 an hour instead of $17. We raised it $3 an hour. We also have a $1,500 sign-on bonus for anyone just to walk in to our process, to our training process. Also, we have a 2,000 employee referral bonus, and we also have a 3,000 sign-on bonus for anyone that is fully licensed to come in. I'm on TV 10, MeTV, Channel 8. We all have commercials on our local televisions. I'm on 3 radio stations. We also pull a lot of applicants from Indeed, which is really the primary base that we get most of our applicants. The good news is, like Brett said, is that since September 6th, the extended monies will be eliminated, and we are seeing an uptick in applications. We have a class of 15 drivers starting on September 7th, and it'll probably take 3 weeks to get them through training, road test. So our next thing is, once they get their license, it's taking DMV 1 to 2 weeks just for an appointment to get their license. So that's another hurdle that we've.
Some of the board members mentioned it earlier. We've also had a comprehensive retention strategy, right? Getting new drivers is one half of it, but keeping the ones you have is the other. And throughout the entire summer, whether it's been events on site, barbecues, refresher meetings, kickoff meetings. My guess is Brett is probably doing something similar as well. But I think that was a key comment somebody made, because what we have seen as the whole Delta variants kicked in is we've seen that elevate the concern with some of our drivers, and obviously our population demographic. As you probably know, tends to be some more senior folks who may have a higher level of concern. So we've been doing a lot on the retention front, and I think that was a key comment made by one of the board members earlier, and I just wanted to add that in.
President White, I do have a partial answer to the earlier question. We are currently routed and scheduled and have a driver for 27,131 students. We need to break that down by elementary and secondary. It is a bit difficult because sometimes those schools are not set up that way. We have about 14,000 students falling in that elementary category. We transport about 8,000 charter school students. We have about 7,075 of our own high school students, or 712 students, and then we have 2,200 special education students, and then the urban suburban numbers, private and parochial on top of that. So we could, because all those different entities have different ways in terms of the grade level breakdown, we'll pull that apart and have that number for you. But I think the reason why I share it that way is because far and away the majority of our students do have transportation scheduled, and I think it's important to put the public's mind at ease in regards to that. The 200 and the 2 different groups of bus routes, the reason why they're most concerning for us is those are students that are scheduled for a bus and have a letter. And as I said, some of them have IAPs as well. And Commissioner Adams, I think I said earlier, and I didn't get a chance probably to completely answer his question. Those students, we know specifically who they are at this point, and we'll be able to communicate with them. But as Wayne and Stephanie articulated earlier, we're still trying to see if we've exhausted every possible opportunity to link and attach work together to try to cover as many of those students as possible. So we wanted to reach out when we had as solid or kind of exhausted all those options for the primary numbers that in terms of the gaps that we had mentioned earlier. The high schools are pretty straightforward, right? Because we know the specific schools, and that outreach is a little bit different. But the other numbers is much more about trying to link work and so on and so forth amongst the different vendors. So I hope that provides a little bit of context and a little bit of to the previous several questions, and then we can certainly do the best we can to break that down by an elementary and secondary. And I think, or we may define it as K to 8 and 9 to 12. It just kind of depends on how most of our schools are broken down to give you a pretty good sense of that. But as I said, 27,131 as of this evening have been scheduled, routed, and have a bus assigned for them for their opening day of school, which could be either September 8th, would be September 8th as we're sitting here this evening.
Okay, I see a number of people have their hands raised. I'll begin with Commissioner LeBron, followed by Commissioner Adams, and then Commissioner Malloy.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, I just want us as a district to be mindful that all of these conversations have been had in English, all the communications have been put out in English, and that we still have a number of multiple language learners and families who probably are seeing bits and pieces of this and not fully comprehending what's going on. And so I would be remiss if I did not uplift that, because that is a concern that I have about whether they understand, our families who are Nepali, Arabic, Spanish speaking, and they understand what's actually happening and what's going on. The other thing I just want to uplift is that over the weekend, I did spend time talking with a number of state legislators and other elected bodies. None of them knew that this was happening for us other than when they saw it on the news as well. And so I want to uplift the fact that we should have had a fast track approach with our partners in county who oversee the DMV. So someone just mentioned it's going to take another week or two after they're trained because there's some delays in getting the appointment with the DMV. We should not have that delay. There is no reason why they will not work with us to fast track the DMV process, to fast track the fingerprinting and background checks, because those are all under the state or the county direct oversight. So I would ask that I don't even want to be having these conversations here because, again, I'm still trying to figure out when we're going to start school. But since it came up, I would be remiss to not address that. We need to be collaborating in that way. And this community, this county has done that with programs like the eviction prevention, with EPI1, EPI2. Like, there's no reason why large organizations that have processes can't come together to address immediate emergency needs of our community. And this is one of those. And that's all I'm going to say for right now.
I had Commissioner Adams and then Commissioner Malloy.
Yeah. So Mr. Smith has said that they have so many students have their schedules and whatnot. I have to take an honest look at this, and that you've been telling us the whole meeting that things can change. Do we have a plan in place to let the families know the route change if they're not going to have, you know what I'm saying? Do we have a plan in place to communicate to the parents that your child may not be able to come to school? That's all I'm saying. We need to keep something in place, some kind of way to contact all the parents to let them know if there's any changes. That's all I have.
Can someone respond to that?
Yes, sir, absolutely. In fact, the process really is to make the route change, and then the family receives a notification as to a written notification, a letter as to whether or not if there's a route change for them and so forth, which also obviously compresses the time schedule here. So we're trying to link the existing routes as much as possible so that we do not end up with a large number of students who now have route changes as a result of some of these links. So there is a delicate balance that we're trying to face here as we're trying to piece this together over the last several days, is not to disrupt actual routes of students as much as possible, but to try to link those routes together because we know there's obviously a time crunch with the opening of school and with the holiday weekend. So it's really linking the students' existing routes which is the letter they received, and then as opposed to trying to change all the routes for those students, which is a very different would require a much longer duration for notification. We have discussed some of those options internally, but right now that's our goal, is to try to take the work that's at the routes that have been developed and link those together as they are, to minimize the disruption as much as possible for families. But that's a great question. Thank you very much, Commissioner, for asking that way.
Commissioner Malloy.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, I have some questions just about RTS and if we've reached further agreements with them. When did we reach out to them? Have other lawmakers been helping us? Have we reached out to the governor? Have we reached out to the county executive? What steps have we taken as a district to address these things? And is RTS in a part of that?
So as I shared in my timeline, Commissioner Malloy, yes, we have been in contact with lots of individuals, including the governor's office, the commissioner, and her senior leadership team, as well as local elected officials. They've been advocating on our behalf for our crisis and our need. As far as RTS, and I know Mr. Carpenter is on, we had, as I articulated in the timeline, we had a meeting Friday night at 9, and then we've had a series of other meetings to try and work through what we had identified at that time as the four secondary schools that we needed covered. So they were working that through. And again, they have given us pretty much assurance that they could cover, and we just have to work through the negotiations part. Did that answer all of your questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, just so the timeline of that, this was after the Thursday when it was announced that we had the emergency, or was this prior?
We met with them on Friday.
Okay, thank you.
So that might in fact be a good segue. As I understand it, Mr. Carpenter is here. Mr. Schmidt, you arranged for him to be here. Mr. Carpenter, are you here? And would you be willing to provide us a summary of where you're at and what support, if any, you could provide us in this crisis?
Glad to do that, President White, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. We have an agreement to do 6 of the high schools. We are prepared to do those 6 high schools on Wednesday. On Friday, received a call from the governor's office and the state education department to see if we could provide additional help for students that didn't have transportation. As the superintendent mentioned, we were together late Friday. Our staff has been nonstop working. I was able to assure the superintendent last night that we are able to cover the schools that don't have coverage. We are putting the schedule together to make sure that that knits together, and we will know tomorrow night if the schedule we put together works. If it does, it'll be 5 days from when that schedule is final to when we can start, so that would be May 13th. This is just like doing a budget.
September 13th, because May 13th, we're almost at the end of the year.
Yeah. Sorry, it's not the first time this weekend I've said May 13th. Sorry about that. September 13th. If that schedule doesn't work tomorrow, then it would be a day-by-day basis. Once we've got a good schedule, we would be able to do the additional schools.
So I have a question with regard to what the board needs to do in terms of changing its policies. How do our policies impact our bus scenario at this point? And do we need to make some changes to our policies to accommodate the fact that we're losing so many bus drivers? Can we begin to look at our policies around our transportation and make some changes to those policies? I know that one of the things that we do is that when we, if there are families who live within the 1.5 eligibility range, that, you know, we have been placing those kids on the bus, and I think for good reasons. But I'm asking, what do we need to do in order to adjust our policies to in some way impact this loss of drivers, and you know, what do we need to do from the board level to, as I said, change our policies?
So you mentioned one of them. We can certainly change the walking distance, that minimum requirement. We can also look at the urban suburban program. There's some wiggle room that we have there as far as talking about a policy change, but also, you know, the way that we're zoned and things of that nature is something that I think is really, really pertinent for us to look at. And we have been talking through for implementation for 22-23, we really need to make sure that we are implementing what is in the state monitor's academic and fiscal plan Dr. Aquino outlined very specific transportation pieces as well as the transportation report. So I've already started combing through the Pupil Transportation Safety Institute report, and those are things that certainly short-term and long-term that we can begin to implement, given where we are. But those are, yes, absolutely, Vice President Elliott. There are things that policy that we can change that would impact, that would assist with the crisis.
So I don't know if you could answer this question, but how many students would that impact relatively? You know, just an approximation of how many students if we change our policies.
So Mike, can you answer, because I know we have this number somewhere, I've been looking at a lot of them. With the 1.5 miles, we have that number. What number is that? If we move that, we would have.
We currently have 1,315 students that are receiving a bus inside a mile and a half, that live inside a mile and a half of their particular school. That number is, as Dr. Marasmal, that's being evaluated because that certainly equates to a number of buses. Some of those students, the reasons are a variety, but certainly the crossing of a busy street or railroad tracks or whatnot. There's a bunch of different variables in there. And then we also have some situations where we have some neighborhoods where it's just frankly not safe for students to walk to school. And we've evaluated those, but there's currently 1,315 students that live inside a mile and a half that are receiving transportation.
And I was I think I'm the one that really advocated for this because of the number and the reasons that parents needed to have the transportation. And I won't get into some of those examples, but they were legitimate examples because if we don't have if we're not able to accommodate some of those parents, then the absentee rate goes up. So, but I think that's something that could be discussed at the policy committee meeting.
And some of those schools have been, some of those schools have walker buses. That's what we referred to them as because it was meant to be an incentive to come back to your neighborhood school, right? So School 17 is a primary school for that. So I think and School 22 both have those concepts in place. So I think that's so there's some of those initiatives that have kind of gone in, and we also in the past have had walker buses for when we had expanded day schools and the schools that ended at 4:30 in the afternoon because everybody was going home in the dark at that point. So, or in the winter months. So we had a couple different things that have gone into play over the years in terms of those walker buses, but that's the number currently to date that we are working from and evaluating.
So let me just finish up with this and address this to Commissioner Powell. Is this something that, to Commissioner LeBron's point about fast tracking, is this something as we look at our policies that we can fast track in order to have discussions around this and fast track and make sure that we have the appropriate policies in place to accommodate the fact that we have limited bus drivers?
To answer your question directly, the policy, it's all one policy that covers it. We can have as detailed a conversation and as dedicated a conversation about this as the body would like, to the extent that the superintendent is ready to have those conversations about policy changes. There may be a consultant in the wings that can provide us some strategies that would address the question of whether we continue to have zones or go zoneless. There are aspects of the current policy that we could simply crack down on and begin to enforce strictly that would save us literally hundreds of buses. And it has little to nothing to do with whether we pick up kids who are within a mile and a half of the school that they've chosen. So we can take up this topic in a policy meeting, a dedicated policy meeting, if you like, but I want to make sure that we have the supports in place and the data on hand that can make it a meaningful conversation.
Talking offline.
Is that
I'm sorry,
Let's do that.
Commissioner Poe.
Go ahead.
Commissioner
Go
Poe,
ahead.
I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I simply said, I think that we should take it offline,
Okay.
look at calendars and look at what data we really need to bring to such a meeting. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's appropriate. Folks are really focused on what's going to happen with their children over the next week. So if my colleagues will indulge me, I haven't asked a question in a while. I do see Commissioner LeBron, Commissioner Malloy, and Commissioner Clark, but I haven't asked a question in a while. And I want to take full advantage of Mr. Carpenter being available to us. And this isn't necessarily directed at you, Mr. Carpenter, but Mr. Schmidt and Superintendent, as I calculated, we have about 3,600 students who are vulnerable, the 3,200, the 283, and the 193. That's 3,676. I think I heard you say, Mr. Schmidt, that we have 27,130 students who will be receiving coverage. What I would like to have broken down even further is, because the crisis seems to be related to our secondary students, our high school students. So the question becomes, between the conversations and negotiations that are taking place with Mr. Carpenter, and if you don't have the answer today, I really wish you had the answer today, but if you don't have it today, I certainly need it tomorrow. Our citizens certainly need it tomorrow. How many of our high school students are vulnerable? So of that 3,600 students, how many of the high school students are in that group? How many of them, I mean, I did see a note from the superintendent that said there were 1,600 students at Edison, at the Northeast Northwest campus, 1,000 students and 600 students at Leadership Rochester. So if you add those numbers up, that's a little bit short of 3,000 students who are secondary students. So my question is, and I think this is the question that most citizens are going to be asking, since we're talking about high school students being vulnerable to go remote, how many of those students, not holding anybody to how those negotiations will turn out, how many of those students, high school students, will we be able to get coverage to? One of the questions that I asked is, we have a number of high schools that are on major bus lines, what I perceive to be major bus lines. University Avenue, you have SOTA, World of Inquiry, you have East High School on Main Street, you have, of course, Wilson Commencement on Genesee Street. So you have a number of our high schools that sit in the path of traditional RGRTA bus routes. Notwithstanding that fact, bottom line is, Mr. Carpenter, and again, if you can't tell me today, then maybe the superintendent can tell me tomorrow, how many of our high school students will you be able to get to the classroom so that they do not have to have remote instruction? That's what people want to know.
So I'll try to say
again,
this.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'll say it as clearly as I can. In speaking with the superintendent last night, we are able to provide transportation for all those schools. We need to change the routing of our current buses, free up operators. That's a process we're going through. And so we'll be able to take all the students. If I can, I know I just segue to the question. So why East High School is an example? Why couldn't they just take RTS buses, fill about 40 students at a time? So if you can picture a 2:30 or 3:30 dismissal and 1,000 students come out, if you don't have 15 or 20 buses waiting for them, we'll take them one bus at a time, but some of them won't be getting home till 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So you need to have, this is student transportation, it's not public transportation. We do a great job with the private parochial students, urban, suburban students, a handful of students to get on a bus, and we just charge a modest amount for their bus fare. But when we're talking about Edison with 1,600 students, you need a fleet of buses, large number of operators. You're not going to get them to school by having them wait at a bus stop in their neighborhood and then take an RTS bus there. It's a very significant investment on our part, but we make it work, and we've done it for a long time and look forward to continuing as long as it works for both of us to do it for a long time.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Now I'll turn this over to my colleagues, but as a follow-up to that, my colleagues will note that I sent an email on September the 4th asking specifically, could we do sort of triple staggering start and finishing times to deal with this problem that you're talking about, Mr. Carpenter? For example, at a local high school that is on a major bus line, could we not have a start times of 7, 8, and 9, and then finish times at 2, 3, and 4, which would deal to some extent with your problem of students? You know, you got buses that, as you say, that can only fit 40 students at 40 citizens. And you're not even counting the number of private citizens that are going to be on those buses.
Right.
If we did not, and I asked the administration, could we not stagger so that students started at different times, thereby at least freeing up the opportunity for more buses to take them? But that's not a question that you can answer. I'm waiting for the administration to answer. So Commissioner LeBron, Commissioner Malloy, and Commissioner Clark, I apologize, but I did want to get my questions in. Go ahead.
No, that's okay, President White, because actually one of the questions I had was around what you just asked for clarification. So thank you for that, because Mr. Carpenter, as you can imagine, lots of folks keep bringing up, just get bus passes, buy them bus passes. I'm like, it doesn't work that way. And also, you guys just went through this Reimagine RTS and change routes too. So I also am a little nervous, and I appreciate the work that you are all doing to get us there. But I do want to put this out to the community who does utilize RTS, like myself 10 years ago, that this may also impact their routes potentially. So I just want to put that out there because it's a ripple effect to our entire community. But I do have a couple of things. Mr. Carpenter, I do want to ask, you said the governor's office called you Friday, and I just want some clarity around whether we as the Rochester City School District contacted you directly prior to Friday to bring this up. So I do want some clarification on that. To my colleagues, I am asking for a formal investigation into this matter, the same way that we investigated the issues around summer school in 2018. So I want to put that out there on record. And finally, I simply want to understand if we're opening on Wednesday or not. And I personally don't want to have any conversations further about numbers, about policies, about anything else. Mr. Carpenter, I do want to hear from you about that, but then I just want to understand. Also, I'm being asked by parents to ask which schools are being impacted. So that could be shared on record so that families listening can understand which schools are being impacted.
So we have been contacted off and on through the summer, asking if we had capacity to do any additional service. The bus shortage that Mike Schmidt, the superintendent, Wayne, and others have talked about, you've all mentioned, it is a real problem. We have a modest shortage, but we also have a large number of employees who work to do public transportation. So we're able to use overtime to cover when we have vacancies. We were not in a position to serve the community the way we do today and take on an additional school. I heard from the Deputy Secretary of Transportation on Friday afternoon that I would hear from the State Education Department that afternoon. I explained to the State Education Department the only way we could support this would be to make changes to our route structure. They said, we want to make sure that the governor does not want students starting remotely. We would like you to engage. And so that evening, I engaged with the superintendent. Our teams have been working closely together. We've come up with a plan. I have a board meeting on Tuesday at noon to make sure I have approval from my board for it. But in speaking with them over the weekend, they understand we want to get students in the school. And as soon as we can finalize our schedule, we can give a go live date, but I expect it would be the week of May 13th that we would be able to give a go live date. I'm sorry, May 13th. Thank you, Superintendent. I'm looking at your head shaking. September 13th. September 13th. It would be sometime that week. We could start hopefully Monday, but we'll know that tomorrow, late afternoon or early evening.
So Commissioner LeBron, where your question was, when can we start? Where, again, before we found out what these last minute, we had planned to share with the board and the public tonight that the 4 schools that we noted, Edison, Northeast, Northwest at the Douglas campus, and leadership, that they would be able to have a first day of school. And we were going to come forward to tonight to say, could we have just one more day because of just the shift? So start on Thursday, September 9th. We had initial conversations with the principals to do some outreach and to work with their staff and their students. We were looking at reconfiguring superintendent's conference day for those 4 schools so they could focus on getting just reacclimated to simultaneous instruction. So the first day would be the 9th, and that whatever student could get at those 4 schools could get to school, and then other students, if they could not get to school, would be learning simultaneously. We worked with Dr. Urbanski, and we were moving forward in that direction to have that happen. So those would be the only 4 schools that might have a dual learning modality. And then the other schools, K-8, would have transportation. With us getting this information, again, about the drivers, where I am is that if we could start on Thursday, September 9th, and then we just have to develop contingency plans for when a route comes offline for that particular group of students at a particular school, to say, okay, now this particular route had 3 students, or it had 40 students or 17 students, working with our department to put plans in place to figure out the individualized learning for that scholar until we could get a route back up. Because if we continue to reconfigure routes, we're going to push the start date back further. So our goal tonight was to say Thursday, September 9th for the entire district, with 4 schools, 4 secondary schools, Edison, Northeast, Northwest, and leadership would have those who could make it could come if they could get their own transportation, and then others would learn simultaneously. And then, as Mr. Carpenter said, now we know that more than likely it could be the 13th. So then all of those, everyone would be fully back on September 13th. Where our quandary is right now is we have to develop the plan for when a route comes off, because we can't continue to reconfigure with Mike and Wayne and Stephanie and that team. So that's really it. If we configure, we need to, once we're done with this meeting, put that together. We could move forward in that way. We would need to work with Dr. Jallo and the state education department, but that is something that would be that would satisfy parents and caregivers and families knowing what we'd be doing. The issue is that this would be constantly evolving as far as the notification to say, now these group of students don't have a run. Now these group of students don't have a run. So, certainly if that's palatable with the board, we can move forward with, we can work to figure out servicing the educational needs of students once they come offline. But readjusting routes is just too much right now until we can get things calmed. That was my plan for tonight until I got the news that I received.
So just for clarity, so are we starting on the 9th, or you still are not 100% clear because of the factors of different routes being taken offline? Because you mentioned that if RTS comes in, and hopefully Bill Carpenter, your board will support, I have no doubts that you will support, but that's 3,200 students.
Right.
You also mentioned there was 193 students from Monroe, yes, and 283 students from Students First.
Yes.
But I think for me, it's still not clear, Dr. Myers, like, are we starting Thursday? Is that what you're asking the board to do tonight, to vote on that calendar? And then we're going to start with whoever we can transport, which I just want to uplift too, that I share some concerns as we're rerouting students, that they're not going to have, parents are not going to have their transportation letters to understand what time to be out there waiting for their bus. Like that, we got to address that too, because people do have to work and figure out that piece too. So I would like to understand how families will get that information, but are you saying right now that that's how we're moving forward? Thursday is the first day of school to whoever can be there.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but I need to make sure that is acceptable, and work with the New York State Education Department, because again, the commitment that we went back to the drawing board is that remote was not an option. So I just need to clarify that, Commissioner LeBron, and once I can work through that, and if we can share that we have a solid plan, then absolutely I could come back. I did not anticipate, I knew that we might lose some and that we could reconfigure. I did not anticipate the drastic drop in drivers, and that's my quandary, frankly.
I want to get to Commissioner Malloy and Commissioner Clark. Commissioner Malloy.
Thank you. So Dr. Myers-Small, just to clarify, so I like the fact that we're seeing a presentation in front of us. I wish that I'd seen that right at the beginning of the meeting. So September 9th for all students in person is what I'm hearing here. I'm seeing now.
Those who have the transportation, sorry for the interruption, but those who have transportation and those who can get themselves here, and then we have to work out a plan for those students who aren't covered by routes. That's it. And
okay, so
we
naturally,
be very careful also because of the unique learning needs of students. So we need to make sure that that is in alignment and that we're not in, we have to make sure that that's settled.
Right. And it's my understanding though that for some of our high schools, so SOTA, for instance, World of Inquiry, Wilson, Monroe, that those high schools are already rooted, that they are good to go. Those were part of the 4 original RTS contracted services that we're doing, correct?
They're routed.
Okay, so so Wilson was in there as well. All City, is that in that group as well?
All City is on
Yes.
On passes.
Okay, all right. So it's really Franklin that we're looking at. Is that also on?
No, the 4 schools: Edison, Northeast, Northwest, and Leadership.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes. Thank you, President White. Most of my questions have been answered, and basically, looking at the plan, matter of fact, my recommendation was going to be, but first of all, thank you, Mr. Carpenter, for coming through. And it seems like a reasonable plan that we start on the 9th. Those that can make it can be in the classroom in person, and those who don't have the ability to get to the classroom would be remote. But I'm assuming that also applies to the 283 students that are transported by First Students and 193 students that are transported by Monroe. I'm assuming that they're going to have that same option.
They would either have to, provide transportation. We would want to work that learning plan out. I don't want to, but that would more than likely be it. They either provide transportation or we provide the instruction. But again, remember, we do have to work with our union partners around this. We can't just impose this. They've been agreeable with the 4 schools, but this starts to shift things. So we would need to have that conversation. So that's why I want to just, I would need to have that conversation with Chris and Steve and the chiefs and others.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm looking at the list. I assume those are old digital hands up by Commissioner Clark and Commissioner Malloy. I do want to see if we can bring this meeting to a conclusion by making a couple points that I think will receive.
Yeah, that was a new hand.
Oh, that was a new hand. Go ahead, Commissioner Malloy.
Right. I just wanted to very quickly, I think all of the commissioners, I can speak for all the commissioners here, in that we want to say thank you to our transportation department for what you have been through for the past few months. And I know that your teams have been working on the clock, and I know that you've been working weekend after weekend throughout this entire summer. I can only imagine the stress that you're under, and we just want to say thank you. We don't mean to put you under machine gun fire. Obviously, we're all nervous about the start of school, but we do want to highlight that, and I can only speak for myself, I guess. I want to highlight that I understand that you've been working hard, and we commend you for the service that you're providing our students in our district. Thank you.
Commissioner Malloy, you saved me a few words. I was going to begin with a statement of appreciation. While our comments are somewhat direct and unequivocal, I'm sure they all understand the anxiety and frustration we have because they too, I'm sure, want to see our citizens, our youngest citizens, often our most vulnerable citizens, in the classroom where they belong. But these are all professionals. They understand that sometimes the kitchen gets hot, and it should be hot because our children are at stake here. And so, but as Commissioner Malloy says, we should begin by saying we appreciate your effort, but we all have to try a little harder. Now, let me just speak about that effort. It is clear to me that this board pretty overwhelmingly wants students in class instructional mode as soon as possible. I know there, for example, Vice President Elliott said she understood the need to perhaps go remote, but I even think in that context, most people across this community, including this Board of Education, want students in their seat. Now, why do I say that? Because Superintendent Myers-Small, at our next meeting, and apparently there will be a need for a next meeting, which would be tomorrow, you have to have a plan. It may be vulnerable to additional questions, but you have to, and I know you realize this, Leslie, I'm just stating this so that the community understands what our expectation is. Come tomorrow. If there's are questions about data, they can certainly be asked by any one of my colleagues. But ultimately, parents don't need data. They need a plan that is supported by the data. So you absolutely, positively must have a plan by tomorrow. And that plan has to be consistent with the board's desire, which is to have students in their seat. Now, I understand, I saw the proposal that was put up. I would not, respectfully, I would not have put up that proposal. As good as it was to see that, apparently you are not ready. You were not ready to say that is your proposal. I think the community and my colleagues want a plan that you understand and might even sell as imperfect, but it is your plan. And you can't have a plan, as you said, until you've spoken to all the important stakeholders, including RGRTA, and you have a signed agreement, the collective bargaining units. That kind of is the kind of plan that the board needs. And we're going to pray and support you in any way we can. That's what citizens need to hear tomorrow. And again, I think I speak for all my colleagues to say that we understand that it won't be perfect. You and your team did not cause this to happen. People are adjusting every day in environments throughout this country to COVID. But you have to present the most imperfect, perfect plan tomorrow so that our citizens have advance notice with respect to whether they're going to have transportation. If they're not, they can make alternative arrangements. Do we agreement there, Superintendent Myers-Small, that you'll do your best to present a plan tomorrow?
It's not do my best. I have to present a plan. What I just asked President White, can you just, since we're online, I'd just like to take a quick recess if you don't mind. If you can just give me, since we're virtually, I just want to caucus to see if we might be able to tighten something, and then I can come back. If you just would indulge me for about 15, 20 minutes, with all due respect, or up to a half hour.
Motion to recess.
Hold on, Commissioner. Is there any objection to giving our superintendent time to consider her plan and have additional conversation with her colleagues? There being no objection, we will be in recess for, you said you need a half an hour. We can give you a half an hour if you need it. I just want to make sure it's a productive half an hour.
Yes, if you give me 30 minutes, please and thank you.
There being no objection, we will be in recess for a half an hour. That would bring us back at approximately 8:50. Let's give you till 8:50. Is that all right?
It's 21 on mine, so can you give me to 8:50? I'm just joking. 8:50 is fine.
8:51. 8:51 it is.
Thank you.
All right, everybody.
All right.
Don't leave. Just put your screen and a microphone on mute. Good evening, everybody. It is now 8:52. Commissioner Clark, it wasn't until 9 o'clock, but it was a couple extra minutes. Superintendent Myers-Small, again, let me reiterate what Commissioner Malloy and I'm sure all my colleagues are thinking. We appreciate the effort, not only your transportation staff, but you and the rest of your team. And I also should say, I know the community appreciates, although they're frustrated, and understandably so, they appreciate the effort, including the last 20 minutes or 30 minutes that you put in. So why don't you give us an update and tell us what you're thinking at this point?
Okay, Marisol, could you put up the visual so the commissioners can see? And I know she was having a little bit of technology issues.
She's working on it. Here it comes.
Okay. Okay, great. Uh-oh. So I thank you for, first and foremost, thank you for allowing me the recess. I had an opportunity to converse with Commissioner Rosa, again, because I wanted to make sure our learning plan moving forward was solid. So where we are, that I would like to put before the Board of Education, and we would need the first one to be approved by resolution, is to change the first day of school for all students to Thursday, September 9th. Students who have been provided transportation or who are able to provide their own transportation will each attend class in person. So we had that conversation. So students who are not able to arrange their transportation, either they currently don't have transportation, or as we have drivers who resign or we lose drivers, that we'll put together a remote learning plan until transportation can be arranged and be put in place. And the other issue, or the other piece, is that to eliminate the walker buses at schools 10, 17, and 22. The total number of walkers that involves is a little over 1,000. So just to reiterate, first day of school, Thursday, September 9th. Students who have been provided transportation by the district will, or if they're able to provide their own, they can attend class in person. Students who are not able to arrange their own transportation will receive a remote learning plan until the transportation can be put in place due to the shortage. And then also eliminating the walker buses at schools 10, 17, and 22.
All right, thank you, Superintendent. Are there any questions? I do see Commissioner LeBron has raised her hand. Commissioner LeBron?
2 points of, one, I'm gonna support this because I want school to start. I just wanna understand that students who don't have transportation are only the 4 schools that you mentioned. So I want clarification around that because I'm not sure if it's just those 4 schools and those numbers of students that don't have transportation. I would be remiss if I did not say that I share concerns about other issues and staffing and lunches for reopening. I just don't feel confident, but I know that we're going to have another meeting on Tuesday. And at that time, I would like to request some clarification around other areas in the district that are going to be impactful potentially to us. I don't know, do we have enough lunch staff? Do we have that figured out? Do we have enough staffing in general, what the plans are? I would hope to see that presentation on Tuesday before Thursday. And finally, East High School posted on social media that they're starting Thursday, September 9th, and the board has not officially voted yet. And I think it was premature of them to post that before this body of board had an opportunity to vote, because their change of date would need to be voted by this Board of Education as well.
Oh, so the question that I can answer, Commissioner LeBron, I'm sorry, is the students that don't have transportation. So as we shared, it's the 4 schools. It's the high schools that we're waiting to have service by RTS, but then it's also those 14 runs that we noted, and any additional runs that where we have driver retirements or we don't have a driver. So we might be pivoting to remote for those classrooms because again, as I said, we can't continue to reroute and reroute. That would cause us not to be able to have a first day of school or would shift it. So it is beyond.
I don't remember. I don't want to give you a number and be wrong.
Glenn, you unmuted by accident.
Oh, okay. So it's the schools supported by RTS and then those routes that don't have drivers. So those would be the pivots. So that could happen. So again, tomorrow, if I
just
get
for clarification, Dr. Myers-Smalls, you're saying the 4 schools plus the additional routes, but we don't know what schools those routes are from at this time. Because we've only mentioned 4 schools and additional routes. So those 4 schools are the students that are going to be impacted for a Thursday start day. The additional routes, do we know the schools of those additional routes?
I'm waiting for Wayne was working on getting. I asked those when we went in and they've been there. I hope to have that before there's Wayne.
Yes, we do have those schools. We are putting it together now so we can share it with the superintendent, and we should have it shortly. But right now we are trying to get them in the system.
So let me see if there are anybody who has any questions. I don't see any. So as a follow-up, we keep on saying the 4 schools. We're talking about Edison, Northeast, Northwest, and Leadership. Is that right, Superintendent?
Real-time update because we want to try and free up some additional. We'll add early college to that list, President White and the rest of the commissioners. So we'll shift them to RTS as well.
So when you say we're waiting for the final agreement between RGRTA and the district on those 5 schools. Is that right?
One more time, President White, I'm sorry.
Yes, when you say we're waiting on those schools, those 5 schools are early college, Edison, Northeast, Northwest, and Leadership. Is that right?
Yes.
And those schools, it is anticipated, it is hoped, we pray that RGRTA will be able to cover those schools, but we don't know that for sure just yet, right?
We know they can cover the schools. We're still negotiating. They have the capacity to cover the schools.
And Mr. Kittleberger just said the 14 routes, he's trying to get us, he will get the board at some time in the immediate future, the identity of those schools that are affected by those 14 routes. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me, unless there's some objection from you or any one of my colleagues, we would need a meeting tomorrow, or I would prefer tomorrow, colleagues. I know it's a holiday, but if the superintendent can identify that there's been successful negotiations on those 5 schools and can identify those 14 routes and how they're working to fill them, or at least notifying parents that there's a challenge for those 14 routes. I think if they can get us that information by tomorrow, and again, I appreciate the fact it's a holiday, but this is difficult work and important work. I think we need to meet again tomorrow. Is there any objection? I hate to put people on short notice, but is there any objection to meeting tomorrow? I see Commissioner Malloy and Commissioner LeBron have raised their hands. Commissioner Malloy?
Thank you. I don't have an objection to meeting tomorrow, just in that regard, but I keep hearing Northeast, Northwest referred to collectively, and since one is middle school, one is high school, I just need clarification if Northwest does not have transportation then at this point, or is it just Northeast?
It's the campus, Commissioner Malloy, but those are 2 schools, and so I'm counting them as individual schools, not as one.
Okay, so they're being counted as individual schools, so both Northwest and Northeast are not covered currently?
Correct, and I had those conversations with the principals, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner LeBron?
I just want to point out that Bill Carpenter said that his board doesn't meet until Tuesday, and he cannot finalize any agreements until they have their approval, which we certainly understand, Bill. Same kind of scenario here. So I think we need to understand what that means in context of the information we're putting out to families and the accuracy of that information. So I just want to put that out there. But
Commissioner LeBron, if I could, just on that point, I saw that note from Bill Carpenter as well. I sent him a text in the chat room and I said, what time is your meeting? And he said noon. So that could mean, in fact, he would have a decision and we could still meet sometime Tuesday. after that meeting, and the superintendent could report. So I just wanted to add that because folks may not be looking in the chat room. He meets at noon. So superintendent, you could get an answer conceivably by 1 or 2, and we could meet still sometime Tuesday.
We have
Go
a
ahead,
board
Commissioner
meeting
Brown.
on Tuesday, Ben.
What's that?
We have a board meeting on Tuesday already.
Okay, well, we'll just have to, is it a special meeting or is it?
It's a
You have
committee.
you have two committee of the wholes. You have a policy committee of the whole and you have an HR committee of the whole. Vice President Elliott has dedicated her agenda to transportation if so needed. So that is available.
And policy, what's on the agenda for policy?
Commissioner Powell, what I have noted is the to provide some brief updates from NISBA, and I also have some updates regarding the policy manual.
Commissioner LeBron, I will get back to you, but Commissioner Powell, is there any problem with putting some of this stuff off for a meeting or two?
Not a problem. We can postpone the entire agenda.
Thank you. So we will do that. That will happen. Commissioner LeBron, you have some follow-up?
Yeah, I did. But just for clarity, this conversation, are we meeting tomorrow? I will make myself available. I do think we should meet tomorrow, not wait till Tuesday at 5:30 to let families know what's up for Thursday, because there are conversations being had here for kids who will need childcare or other arrangements, families who have to go back to work. So I'm not comfortable waiting until Tuesday at 5:30 to give them answers. I just want to put that out there. That is unacceptable for me. But I do want to understand, Van, because you mentioned another school that we hadn't mentioned. You said early college. And again, I want to understand that these 4 schools were Edison, Northeast, Northwest, and Leadership. But you mentioned early college. I just want to make sure that we're on record saying which schools that we know for sure impacted, with the understanding that the superintendent will come back to us hopefully tomorrow with clear information around other schools that are going to be impacted. In addition to Walker buses, I do want to mention that it is going to be impactful, because I was a parent that had to walk 1.3 miles. I say this all the time as part of my own story with my 2 older children. If you have a child that's sick with asthma or other medical conditions and you have to walk them and then walk, that's going to impact our attendance at some point. And so we will absolutely have to have some impactful long-term conversations at a later date. But I want to plant that seed now so it doesn't come as a surprise to anybody a few months down the line when we're eliminating these Walker buses for students with a 24 to 48 hour notice. I just want to put that on record too. I understand that we're in a transportation crisis, but one, again, that we all have to take ownership of.
Commissioner, hold on, Mr. Schmidt. Commissioner LeBron, I mentioned early college because moments before the superintendent said, I want to put early college on that list. So that list expanded to include early college. And Superintendent,
President White?
That's correct.
Yes, she added early college.
When we were in the meeting in my conference room, excuse me, putting early college under the RTS umbrella would free up some additional yellow buses. So again, I'm trying to quickly work with the team to see how we can just free up some additional buses for, again, some more of our vulnerable populations, and just kind of create that kind of, it's not a bank at this point, but we're just trying to figure out how to shift some yellow buses.
Mr. Schmidt, I am going to get to you in a second, but I had a question about this list of now 5 schools: Northeast, Northwest, the Frederick Douglass campus. One is someone has indicated is a lower school with lower grades. Were they previously going to get yellow buses, and then the upper school was going to get RGRTA buses? What was the prior deployment of buses for that campus? Because one included a lower school. Were they getting yellow buses?
Yes, sir. All 3 of those schools. Yes, sir. All Northeast, Northwest, the whole school was planning for yellow buses.
So my question is, if you had an upper school and a lower school, and you had planned to get, they already had a deployment of yellow buses for the lower school, were you able to identify space saving by putting the older students on the buses with the younger students? This is one of my earlier questions. Is there not a savings opportunity to to where normally we probably wouldn't include those students on the same bus. Are we doing that now to save space?
The campus is a 712 campus currently, and all the students are routed together on the buses. They're not differentiated by grade level.
Okay, all right. So there's no opportunity. Okay.
And remember, we have School of the Arts in East too, so that's a regular grouping.
Okay.
But putting high school students, I know one of your questions was high school
Right.
students with elementary students. You really don't want to do that.
Also, Van White, I just want
Yes,
to
sir.
make sure that you understand, you did mention about the 14 for first student. Also, taking consideration that we still have 32 routes for sped kids that we are trying to place also. So I don't want to leave that out of the equation.
Okay, so we got to be clear. And I agree, and I haven't heard anybody object to the notion of meeting tomorrow in advance of the meeting on Tuesday with RGRTA. And at that point, we would be approving the September 9th start date, right? But we do, I think, have to meet on Monday. So now what I'm hearing is early college, Edison, Northeast, Northwest, and leadership. And we're waiting for the approval from RGRTA and how that's going to work out. We also have to hear more detail about the 14 routes, but I just heard Mr. Kittleberger say that there are 32 routes. Is that what you said, Mr. Kittleberger?
32 routes for special ed that we're trying to place somewhere. Yes.
So when I said at the end of our meeting, before we went into recess, we need a plan. So the plan that we're going to need to hear tomorrow is in detail. How are we going to address those 14 routes, those 32 routes for special education, and hopefully get an update, perhaps not the final update because we won't know until Tuesday, with respect to what's going to happen to early college, Edison, Northeast, Northwest, and leadership. Is that a summary of what we can expect to hear tomorrow? And let me emphasize again, imperfect though it may be, it has to be a definitive plan. And if a board member asks, okay, what schools are we talking about? What, not just routes, but what schools are we talking about? And we understand that there may be students that you just can't cover. We need to know what those students and what those routes are, what students and schools will be affected. Again, let me emphasize, we need a plan. We know it cannot be perfect. Circumstances just do not allow that. But we must have a definitive plan, a dashboard, heat maps, something that will allow parents to ultimately get a plan that tells them how their kids are going to be picked up. And if they're not, parents need to know that, and they need to know how they're going to get their kids to school. Are we all on the same page? Again, I just want to repeat, because we need a plan tomorrow for those 14 routes, 32 special education routes, and those 5 schools, early college, Edison, Northeast, Northwest, and leadership. And that is the entire universe of the question that citizens are asking: what students and how they will get, what students need transportation and how they will get to school. There's no other unanswered questions. Yes, ma'am.
President White, I would also ask for the totality of the actual number of students. Like I've heard in this presentation alone, some wavering numbers. I heard some wavering numbers last, a few days ago. I've been writing my notes. I can't even keep up with the numbers that are being thrown at us and in the way that it's being presented, because I just heard Kittleberger say 32 routes for special ed, but then I heard them say we prioritize special ed. I didn't even think they were a part of this conversation at this particular point. So yes, I want this in writing at this point. Yes, however they want to present it in writing, whether it's a PowerPoint, I would still, as a board member, like to receive the numbers in an email so that I can have them for myself, that they're part of the minutes, part of the record for the future. But I need to understand the actual totality of students going to be impacted by this.
Superintendent, the message is clear. Hold on one second. I think someone has raised their hand. General Counsel, Interim General Counsel Steve Carling, you had a question or comment?
I just wanted to note that the administration actually has asked for the resolution to move the start date to September 9th. It's before the board tonight. The clerk has it and is ready to provide it to everyone. I think the administration has asked that it be voted on tonight rather than wait until tomorrow, so they can get some notices out and things like that.
Initially, and I'm looking at the participant list to see if there are any comments or questions about that. Initially, my response would be, I would be reluctant to approve. I see the need for it. You say that they can't make moves with respect to employment decisions and so forth, but you're asking us to approve a date, a start date, without knowing what the plan is. We've heard a lot of things verbally, but there's not been a plan. Now, I'm open to hearing, personally, I'm just one vote, to hearing what the superintendent has to say in terms of why we would need that now in advance of knowing what the plan is, what will actually happen on September the 9th. That's what you're asking us to do. We don't even have anything on paper. And I would just say, I got to speak honestly and truthfully, just within the last 10 minutes, we've heard someone rightfully, accurately say, oh, let's not forget the 32 special education runs. So I would really, I can appreciate the need to try to get that resolution signed and moving forward, but do we have a plan that would have the board say, I see what's going to happen on September 9th? Let me go to the question log here. Commissioner Powell?
Yeah, I'm in support of expediting the vote on the calendar alone, primarily because it sounds to me like no matter what else happens, whether we have RTA support at the 100% of what we're asking for or anything else, the superintendent's made it pretty clear that she needs that extra day. And the rest of the plan essentially trickles from that. So I'm in favor of voting on that resolution tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. Commissioner Malloy?
I'm also in favor of voting on that tonight. I want our kids back in school as close to that original start date as possible. Caregivers need to know, families need to know, just for their childcare situations. We need to get this expedited, and I think by voting on that tonight, if we approve it, is holding people's feet to the fire. We are going to make this happen for our students. They need to be back in the classroom.
Well stated. Commissioner Adams?
Yeah, I'm in support of parents knowing as soon as possible, because they do need to make arrangements, whether or not to spend the money on getting the hair done tomorrow or not, all of that, they need to know. So I'm in support of definitely making a decision about the start date.
Understood. Commissioner LeBron?
Same here. I want to support voting on this tonight. I don't think it's going to change anything other than at least parents will know that Thursday, September 9th, schools are going to open. We just have to figure out whether you have a bus, don't have a bus, who's going to be impacted, how we can support. My plea, though, to this entire community, because I know we have thousands of people watching, if you have a friend, a neighbor, someone that you know that's going to need a ride, open your car. This is really going to take a community effort. I pray and hope that we do not leave our kids stranded. This is something we are going to have to address and investigate. This district cannot just make these plans and then we're going to ignore how we got to this point. And I want to reiterate that. But if you have kids that are in your neighborhood or your neighbors, your caregivers, your nephews, cousins, nieces, whatever the case may be, and you have transportation, please step up and support families so that we can get all of our kids to school. That's it.
Commissioner Clark, did you want to be heard on this latest proposal to present the resolution for September the 9th start date?
I'm in support of the resolution for September 9th start date because I concur with the conversations that I've heard previously. And I do agree that, setting the start date kind of puts stick in the sand, say that by this date, things will have to be in place. So I would support it.
So can I make a motion?
I was going to ask you what your pleasure was, but obviously you want to make the motion. So go ahead, Vice President Elliott.
Yeah, so I'd like to make the motion to support. I don't know the number of the resolution, can't see it, but like, okay.
Resolution 122.
So yeah, make a motion to approve resolution 122.
There's been a
Commissioner Moore, I
motion.
think, just seconded.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Any questions or further questions or comments regarding that particular resolution, which is 122, which would have the district have an official start date of September the 9th. It's required because the Board of Education sets the calendar for the academic year. I would just say my only comment is I am certainly persuaded by my colleagues' comments. I think while I have some hesitancy about setting out a resolution before an actual plan is placed, I think my colleagues are right for the variety of reasons that they offered. So I too will support a September the 9th start date. Any other questions or comments?
President White, I have
Yes,
just a few comments. Certainly, thank you for passing that resolution.
Well, you haven't voted yet. We haven't voted yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I'll wait till after.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So there being no further questions or comments, let's go ahead and vote. All those in favor of resolution 122 to have the school academic calendar altered to start September the 9th, indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? Madam Clerk, are we going to do the electronic voting? I'm on my cell phone.
I have it going in board docs, but I know everyone's not logged in, so I'm voting for you electronically. No worries.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Madam Superintendent, you were going to say something?
I am. Just a few things. Certainly, thank you for voting favorably on the start to school. I know there are a lot of moving parts. We will have a plan ready. We need to, I don't think we decided on the time, so I need to know that so we have a plan ready. We will have a plan ready for the board with numbers and the specifics. While at the beginning of the presentation, when Wayne got on, he did not say the numbers, but he did mention the prioritization of special ed. So we should have said the number, but that was mentioned at the beginning. And the other thing is we are excited and we're looking forward to having our scholars back in person, as many who will be here. We will have a plan ready for the Board of Education and our public. We will make the notification probably tonight or first thing in the morning to families so they know. And then we will work very specifically for those scholars who do not have transportation. And again, we'll pinpoint those numbers. We'll identify what those numbers are in the schools that are impacted. We will work as a central office team with the schools to make sure that there is a plan. I just want us to remember that when we come back tomorrow, numbers could change because of rerouting, because of the prioritization. So I just want to be clear about that, but we will show kind of before and after. We'll make sure that that is clear. And we look forward to coming back tomorrow and presenting all of that information to you.
Dr. Myers Small.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, President.
No, go ahead, Vice President.
One concern, and I remember Commissioner LeBron mentioned this, is about absenteeism. You know, if our families cannot find transportation, are they going to be penalized because they're not able to be in school because they can't find the transportation? How are we going to work with that?
That's something that we'll have to uplift through our attendance department, through our team of really working to try and figure out how to maneuver that. But that's where you have the remote situation come into play, where they would attend that way because that counts as valid attendance as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott. In terms of saving our clerk a lot of time doing a Google survey about people's availability, and I heard no objection to meeting tomorrow, is 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, just speak your mind right now. Is there a particular time that might work tomorrow for everybody?
6 is better for me.
6? Anybody have any problem with 6?
No.
All right, that's what it sounds like it's going to be. So we'll meet tomorrow at 6. Madam Superintendent, you have the time that we will meet tomorrow. You'll have that plan, and there'll be obviously some further deliberation, and there'll be the understanding that RGRTA will not finalize their commitment to that plan until the following day at noon or thereabouts. If there
Commissioner
are
Adams has his hand up.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you, Superintendent. Commissioner Adams?
So I just had my hand up in response to Vice President Elliott's comment about the absenteeism. I wanted you to know that on Wednesday, I'm meeting at the hotel here with the people from around the state about the legislative thing coming up in next year. And that's going to be like one of the top things that I mentioned. We need a waiver for this absenteeism because it's putting schools in receivership. We need a waiver, some kind of waiver for not just for this here thing that we're going through. It's just the whole pandemic thing. We need or this district is going to end up in receivership. So I just needed you to know that I'm fighting that fight with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Thank you, Vice President Elliott. Before we take the motion to adjourn, I just wanted to notify everybody that the surrounding community has been really responsive to this crisis, and a number of local pastors have offered up help and assistance. In fact, a community meeting was planned for a variety of issues, trying to encourage people to drive, trying to help people understand what the district's plans were. Was set for First Genesis Baptist Church. A lot of pastors Johnson, McReynolds, Yeoman, Cherry, have all volunteered to assist in this effort. There will be a community meeting, but we got to wait for the dust to settle, probably towards the end of the week. And that will be a meeting for people to learn about opportunities to drive. It'll be a meeting for parents to get clarity about what the district's plans are moving forward. So stay tuned over the next couple of meetings, and we'll give you further detail, because as a number of people said, this solution cannot just stop with the district having a September the 9th start date. It's going to require a lot of continued planning and collaboration and creativity on everybody's part. But for those who've helped out already, on behalf of the board, we want to say thank you. All the speakers who spoke tonight, First Student, Monroe, RGRTA, we really do appreciate your support. The staff that have been working round the clock, you have our thanks and our appreciation. No one's saying mission accomplished. There's still a lot of work to be done, but on behalf of the board, I want to say thank you. And to the community, I want to say on behalf of the board, thank you for your patience. We realize it's been a drain on you and very difficult, but we are working so that the burden of not knowing where your child will be is going to be alleviated in short order. Stay tuned. If you can, tune in tomorrow at 6 o'clock. The board will be meeting at a similar format, and it will be available for the public to tune in. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
It's been moved by Commissioner Malloy, seconded by, I think I heard Vice President Elliott. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposition? The ayes have it. Good night, everybody. Be safe.
Night.